Hello and welcome back to Rev Real Estate School. I'm your host, Michael Montgomery, and today what we're looking at is how we can get out of a rut in real estate or how we can get unstuck. Now, why is this so important? It's so important because momentum is really everything in real estate. And we've probably all experienced this. When we start to actually get some listings, get some buyers, then we tend to get more and more. And then when things slow down or we get stuck, it's hard to get the momentum going again. So that's what we're going to look at today. Now, why do people tend to fail at this? Well, generally speaking, and myself included, when we end up having these negative thoughts or we start to get into a rut, these negative thoughts start to spiral. Things just start to spiral. They just get worse. And generally speaking, it's because we're in our own heads and we're starting to plan through worst case scenarios. And we start thinking the worst possible outcome is actually what's going to happen. Now, this has been a struggle of mine for years and years. So it's still always a work in progress. It's not something that just switches overnight. But there are a few things that we can look at in order to make this process move a little quicker and get us back on that momentum train quite fast. Now, to kick things off, to quote Warren Buffett, when you find yourself in a hole, the most important thing to do is to stop digging. So that's the first concept that we have to be aware of here. We need to stop digging the hole. Now, there are two components to this. Number one is just general negativity. So we start to get into our own heads and we start to think to ourselves, worst case scenario, as we already said, and it starts to spiral out of control. But the other piece to this is exhaustion. Exhaustion plays a huge role. And once we're exhausted or we're starting to feel burnt out, and then we continue to work, we end up continuing down that bad path further and further and further. And so first thing that we need to do is we need to stop negativity and we need to stop exhaustion. But how do we actually end up doing that? Now, when it comes to negativity, there's a ton of different things we can do, like meditation, like working out, all sorts of things. But really what I find when it comes to being in this negative state in real estate and we're really stuck, really what I find is I'm in my own head. I'm in my own head. I'm thinking a lot. And then oftentimes I have a lot of time on my hands too, which is not helpful either. So my rule here is once I start to see myself slipping into one of these paths, I have to get out with people. I have to get out with people, talking to people, going to events, doing things with friends. Now, if you're on the introverted side, and I am, sometimes that doesn't sound great. And in fact, when you're in a rut, it's going to sound even worse. So if you're in a great mood right now, you might think, oh, that's a great idea. But when you're in a rut, the actual thought of getting out there in public and socializing sounds quite painful. But here's the interesting thing. Once you actually end up going out and doing something, you are going to feel better. Almost always you feel better after you're out and around people. Now, what I love about this strategy is just getting out there around people and having more conversations is twofold. Number one, we can't really be in our own heads when we're out there and we're talking to people. Yes, we can somewhat be in our own heads, but generally speaking, we're going to be outside of our heads. We're going to be in there having conversations with people. Now, number two is this also going to skyrocket our success because we're starting to have more conversations with people, and more conversations means more sales. We've talked about that at length before. So if it's a production rut, this works perfectly because we're increasing our conversations, but then also in doing so, we're going to move ourselves out of that negative mindset. But this does involve doing the uncomfortable thing, which is having conversations with people when we least want to. So it's really important that that is in our mind, that we know it's going to be challenging. If we prepare ourselves for it to be challenging when the time comes, then we're not going to be surprised when we get into one of these states and then we realize, okay, we got to get out there and talk to people, but I don't want to. But it is worth doing. It is what's going to get us out of that negative spiraling mindset. It makes a big difference. But then we also have exhaustion. Now, exhaustion, when this starts to bubble up, it can actually start to gnaw away at us and it can be quite damaging over time. Now, what we suggest is always taking 2 non-consecutive days off per week. So generally speaking, with a lot of folks in our programs, we're doing Wednesdays and Sundays. We are not working. We are not sending emails. We are not sending text messages. We are not prospecting, nothing. Now, if you find this extremely challenging, work for half the day. Work until noon and then you're done for afternoon and evening. But here's the trick. As soon as we see ourselves in one of these ruts and we need to get unstuck, we need to take 1, if not 2 full days off. We need to just take time off work completely. We need to get away from it. And this is really going to help us recharge our batteries and rekindle our love for real estate. Because oftentimes when exhaustion kicks in, we're going to start to actually neglect real estate. And we may even start to resent real estate. So take those 1 to 2 days off and then get out there and just start talking to people. You're going to notice this is going to have a very, very fast impact. Now, the next step is changing direction. So, what do we mean by changing direction? Well, whatever we're doing has got us into this rut. So now we have to start to think about how we're going to work out of it. So, the first couple things that we can do here when we think about changing our direction is we want to start to run a test. Now, what do I mean by this? I mean, start running a marketing test. Try a new lead generation strategy and just test it. Not with the intention of this is going to be the way I'm going to generate leads, but if you haven't done a certain type of lead generation structure, maybe you haven't done a lot of open houses, maybe you haven't done a lot of door knocking, maybe you haven't tried events and networking and volunteering, just get out there and start running some tests, but think of them as tests. So we're just testing different marketing avenues. And then from there, we can decide, is this something that we want to double down on or not? Now, generally speaking, we run our tests for 6 months time. So if you're going to get into, say, geofarming, it's probably going to take you a year before you actually start to see something come back. So if you quit after 3 months, you're not going to see anything. With geofarming, if you quit after 6 months, well, generally speaking, you have 1 or 2 people in the pipeline by then. So dedicate yourself to just testing a marketing channel. It can be anything under the sun for a 6-month period of time. And then the next way to change your direction is to change your surroundings. Now, this can be around people, but what I like to do is I just like to reorganize my office. I like to move my desk over here. I like to move my ring light. I like to move my structure as to what I'm actually working on. I just like to move that around ever so slightly. Or you can even reorganize a room in your house. It's amazing what impact this is going to have on you. It's just shocking. So whenever I start to reorganize my desk and move around my second screen, I just feel like it's a brand new working environment for me. And it gives me this fresh outlook on everything. So even these minor little tweaks when we're changing direction, yes, it's in the marketing space, but it's also just around us, changing our surroundings, even in minor ways, changing around our desk, changing around our office, or just reorganizing a room in our house. This can have a huge impact. Then step 3 is we have to start creating movement. Now, movement, like we talked about momentum, movement is going to lead to momentum. So we need to actually be doing something in order to get momentum. A lot of times we think that, okay, eventually we're going to get out of this, something's going to fall into our lap. But truly, when we start moving is where the momentum will occur. So what do we mean by this? Well, we need to define what is the minimum viable progress. So what's the smallest amount of progress that you can make in order to move us in that right direction? Now, oftentimes when we're thinking about movement, we're thinking of working out. And yes, actually being physical is going to help us dramatically when it comes to this. But the other thing is on the work side. If we're in the work side and we're just not in the routine, we are just in a rut, we need to create a 15-minute work block, just a 15-minute work block. And then we're taking a 15-minute break. So we're doing these 15-minute work blocks. And what this is going to do is this is the minimum amount of time that we can spend and we can focus on something for 15 minutes. And then as we start to get into that, we're going to start to create momentum. So again, the key to momentum, which is where we all want to get to, is we have to actually start with movement. We have to start with some type of movement. So some small type of work block, or if we're talking physically, we're talking a 15-minute walk. So really what we're doing here is we are starting to get the gears turning, both in work, but then also on the physical side can be extremely helpful. So what are our actionable takeaways here? Well, first off, when we're in a rut, we have to stop digging. So we have to get out there and we have to start talking to people. Although it's not going to be fun and we're going to think in our own minds that this is not going to help and we're not in the right mind space to do this, we're going to feel better afterwards. Next, we have to look at a new marketing channel. So we have to run a test. Run a test going deep down a marketing channel. Now, another thing that you can do in this case is you can even just take on a new skill. So maybe that marketing channel is going to be geofarming and the skill you're taking up is some level of graphic design when it comes to your postcards. That's a great combination of learning a new skill as well as a new marketing technique. And then we also want to ensure that we are doing the minimum viable progress. What's the minimum that we can do in order to get us back onto that momentum train? We really just want to start moving towards that momentum train, knowing that we're not going to think ourselves out of this. We're only going to move ourselves out of this. Thank you very much for watching. And please, in the comments, let us know if there's anything that you do to get yourself out of a rut. Thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next lesson.